In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Moya, light, Moya, bright. Welcome back, guys. You know that we love having you here with us. The channel is growing. Thank you so much for all your contributions, for your subscriptions, your liking, and your sharing. As we said last time, we're going to have part 2 with the nation's rebel, Mr. Carl Niehaus. I want a new adjective every time. Not deputy African, then it's the nation's rebel, but thank you so much, Mr. Carl. Oh, by the way, also, we've got our members who are live streaming. These are extra member benefits. So please, if you've got any questions, do throw them in. Mr. Carl, thank you so much for coming again.
Thanks, Ntsiki, and you can see we color code.
You know, I keep saying that.
As I walked in, you said that we got a psychic connection.
I think we might. So, we were, in our last conversation, we were around about, now you had been arrested with the treason stuff, with your ex-wife. So can we pick it up from there, the journey?
I'm glad you start there, because remember in the previous podcast, I was telling you about Vincent Chabalala.
Yes.
And I told you about Vincent sitting in the library at St. Peter's Priory reading a Bible. And he then showed me that that Bible was signed by the longest serving president of the ANC, Oliver Tambo. And he asked if he could take that Bible with him. Now it connects well with what you're asking me about that time of my life. Because as I told you, I took Vincent and a number of other young activists across the border into Botswana. And they then went into exile, and then when Vincent went for training, but he took that Bible with him. And many, many years later, after President Tambo came back from exile, and he was now very ill, he was actually on his deathbed. And I went to visit him. And I saw there's a Bible next to the bed. And I opened it, and it was the same Bible. So you see the connection. Vincent left. He went into exile. He took the Bible with him. And he made sure that President Tambo receives that Bible. So this young man gave him the Bible back. And President Tambo, right on his deathbed, had that Bible lying next to him. Because as we all know, he was a very religious man. So for me, there's so many connections about the past, the present, and the future. I also told you about the question that President Tambo asked when he saw Cyril Ramaphosa coming into the first conference that the ANC had after it was unbanned in 1991 in Durban.
Ubani law.
When he said Ubani law. So you see, for me, there's the context of a young generation who were really produced by 1976 and the uprisings of 1976. And I told you that my own political consciousness was very much formed by the events of 1976. And those young people going into exile, making incredible sacrifices. You know, young people who sacrificed their whole lives. I told you that Vincent came back after he was trained. He was then killed at a safe house in Alexandra. Young man, very courageously fought back when the police and the South African Defence Force cornered him in that house. There was a gunfight of over an hour. One young man with an AK-47 fighting back until he was eventually shot dead. And then you pull that through to Cyril Ramaphosa being parachuted into the African National Congress. None of this history. Never made these sacrifices. Not known within the structures of Umkhonto we Sizwe, not part of the liberation struggle. But he gets elevated to the position of Secretary General of the ANC. And then, of course, later he becomes, even now, the president of the ANC and the president of the country. And it brings me to that poem by Mazwai, where he says, if only the dead can see what their sacrifices have become. Because for me, the history of our liberation struggle is so important to understand especially the huge sacrifices that people made. Remember that Solomon Mahlangu also came as a young man back after he went into exile, after he received training, and ended up being given the death sentence and being executed on the 6th of April, which was so-called Van Riebeeck Day, because the Boers wanted to have that triumphalism of executing this young man on the same day that they used to celebrate that Jan van Riebeeck first came to South Africa. Now, this is our history. This is what so many people paid the ultimate price for. And for me, the context is so important because it highlights the betrayal, and it makes the treasonous betrayal of what Ramaphosa has done, what the African National Congress has done in betraying the blood of Solomon Mahlangu, of Vincent Shabalala, and of many thousands of other young people and also older people. The blood of Chris Hani. They betrayed all of that. And today we sit here, as you and I'm talking a few days ago, the government of national unity was now formalized, the so-called government of national unity, with this bloated cabinet, the largest cabinet that we've ever seen, all these people back on the gravy train, all of them back to have their little blue lights. Now, that is truly not what the struggle is about and was about. The struggle was not for a bloated cabinet, for people to get huge salaries and blue lights. The struggle was about those young people like Vincent, who came out of the streets of Alexandra in dire poverty and said, we want to change our lives. We are not doing that. And for me, the challenge right now is, how are we going to work to prevent this so-called government of national unity, this grand coalition with white supremacists? Because the Democratic Alliance is a racist, white supremacist party. The Freedom Front Plus is even worse. How are we going to prevent this coalition from destroying the last little bit of vestiges of what has been achieved in our liberation struggle? How are we also going to turn the tide and start working for true economic liberation in our lifetime? Now, it's important when I think about my life and what I dedicated it to, how I went to prison. I spoke to you in the previous podcast about how I was tortured, and it was terrible torture. I lost over 60% of my hearing because of that torture. Solitary confinement, it drives you right to the edge of insanity almost. So I had to ask myself, in 2022, in December 2022, can I continue to be part of what the ANC is doing? Can I justify continuing to be a member of this party? And the answer for me was no, I couldn't. Because I came to the conclusion that the ANC in its totality, not just Cyril Ramaphosa, not just a few of those accolades that he have at the top with him, but the whole ANC from top to bottom has sold out. It's rotten to the core. And then I decided I must leave. Now, it's been a complicated thing because the ANC expelled me. I appealed to that expulsion.
Before we get to the expulsion, is there no other history that you can give us? Because what happens, there's Codesa and all that. So can we...
We can go back to that.
Okay.
And yes, it is important to talk about what happened at Codesa because Codesa was an exercise in unacceptable compromise and selling out in its own.
Yeah.
And I did talk in the first version of this podcast about that, because I spoke about how it was prepared by white monopoly capitalism to have the kind of deals that were made at Codesa. Remember, I spoke about how Cyril Ramaphosa and Rolf Meyer and a number of the other negotiators would go to game farms, make the deals behind the scenes. Deals that were anyhow already pre-cooked, even when the ANC was still in exile. I told you about those secret meetings that Thabo Mbeki, Aziz Pahad, Eso Pahad, Professor Willie Estruisa, all of them had.
What's this one in Botswana? There's this controversial meeting in Botswana that keeps coming up.
Well, there were many meetings in Ntsiki, and Botswana was one of them. There was at one stage a big cultural conference in Botswana, and I think in the wake of that conference, behind the scenes, a lot of funny shenanigans were also going on. But the point that I want to make is there were a whole set of engagements that we as ordinary South Africans knew nothing about. But they were pre-planned in order to make sure that eventually, when there is a transition to a so-called democracy, that democracy will not cede economic control to the people, but that economic control will continue to be in the hands of white monopoly capitalism and imperialism. There was a very seminal meeting that the ANC had with the captains of industry in South Africa, Anglo-American, Anglo-Val, all the big companies in 1985 in Lusaka. And it's very interesting when you read what Ronnie Casuals writes about it. Because Ronnie says, you know, I'm a communist. I was part of that meeting, and I was amazed how quickly our delegation just agreed with the delegation from these big capitalist companies of South Africa that the basic economic structure of South Africa is not going to change. He says it was extraordinary how fast they agreed to that. So yes, we are going to have a so-called non-racial society. We will have universal franchise that these captains of industry agreed to. But in terms of the restructuring of the economy, that's not going to happen. And the ANC agrees. So the roots of what was finally decided in Codesa can be traced back to all of those meetings. To the 1985 meeting in Lusaka, to all those meetings in Europe, in Geneva, in London, the meetings that I told you that Esopad, Aziz Pad, Tabu, Mbeke, Professor Estreise, who was a professor of political philosophy at Stellenbosch University, but also a central figure in the National Intelligence Service of South Africa, they prepared the ground. So when you ask me about Codesa, Codesa was a table that was laid for us, predetermined what is going to happen. And we ended up with this deeply compromised constitution. And of course, they dished up to us this propaganda that this is the best constitution in the world. Bollocks! This constitution is a new liberal constitution. It doesn't address the historical facts of the loss of the land and the way in which the majority of Black and African people have been disenfranchised and disempowered in South Africa. This constitution guarantees in Section 25 property rights. It is outrageous. You guarantee the property rights of the white colonists who stole the land at gunpoint and say, no, as long as you have, your title deed, you are safe. But you stole the land. And some of those people who've stolen the land don't even have title deeds. There's a very interesting story that the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF tells about what happened in the Northwest Province. The state decided to build a big national road up to the Botswana border. So, of course, land had to be expropriated in order to build the road. So they went to all these farmers there in the Northwest, those AWB characters, Ventersdorp and further on, Delaray, da-da-da-da. And they said, we want to expropriate your land. Can you please provide us with the necessary documentation so that we can actually pay for the land that we need to build this? Oh, these farmers said, no, we are so patriotic. We will donate this. You know why?
Because they didn't have title deeds.
They didn't have the title deed. So they didn't want to expose the fact that they actually sit on that land because of the way that they stole it. Their forefathers stole it. And now they sit on thousands of hectares, but there's no title deeds. So these are the kind of things that ought to have been addressed in a constitution that was a constitution for the full liberation of the people of this country. If it was a constitution that took seriously the empowerment of the majority of Black and African people, it could never have been written in the way it has been written. So we cannot say that this is the best constitution in the world. It is a terrible constitution. It is terrible in the way it is formulated, but it is terrible also in the foundation, in the premises that it is based on. And that is why Advocate Muzi Sekekane always says, this whole constitution, not just clause section 25 or this clause or that clause, must be changed. This whole constitution must be rewritten because the fundamentals, the basic tenets of the constitution are wrong. How do we deal with the issue of land? How do we deal with the issue of traditional leadership? How do we deal with the issue of traditional law in South Africa, which is not recognized in the way that it should be? All of those things need to happen. So my view is the constitution has to be totally scrapped. We need to go back to a new constitutional assembly, a constitutional assembly that is properly constituted by the people of this country, not with documents being fed to us from the United States of America and the United Kingdom and Australia, etc., etc., etc. I served in the first Justice Portfolio Committee after 1994. We kept on being sent off to Australia. We kept on being sent off to New Zealand. We must go and see how the parliament functions in Westminster in the United Kingdom. Then they bring back to us these templates. This is what you should do about a human rights commission. This is what must happen with regards to the provisions for a public protector. All of it written somewhere else. And then we sit in that committee and adopt those templates. And we adopt laws that have been written in Australia, have been written in New Zealand, have been written in the United Kingdom, and make them applicable to South Africa. And of course, those who send us those templates know very well what they are doing, because they are making sure that the balance of power in South Africa is not going to change. Those laws that get formulated outside the borders of South Africa even, and that gets rubber stamped by a parliamentary portfolio committee of justice in South Africa and then taken into parliament and by a vote is adopted, like a sausage machine of adopting this kind of legislation. Those votes are actually votes of the disenfranchisement of our people. And that is what we have been involved in and complicit in. Now, I'm not sure if we always understood what we were doing. I think sometimes we were also just allowing ourselves to be carried away by all these new liberal, beautiful ideas without saying, but how do they relate to our South African and our African context? So now that we've got 30 years of experience, now that we have seen where this deeply compromised constitution that was spoon-fed to us by Western European powers has taken us, how it has disempowered our people, how it is not expressing the character of true Africanism and African culture, we need to change. And that brings me to the point I wanted to make before you asked me about Codesa. So I said to myself, what have I got to do now? I need to take a different decision than staying in this ANC. And as you know, because during that time you and I have been friends and we talked, I then formed this small political party called the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance.
How does it break down, before I read, how does the relationships break down with ANC?
Oh, it relates to the fact that I then decided, after I'd actually appealed my expulsion, which meant that
How did we get to expulsion?
The expulsion was because I was criticizing the ANC fundamentally. Because I was calling for Cyril Ramaphosa to be removed as president. You will remember the times that I stood outside Nazareth, where the National Executive Committee of the ANC was meeting, standing like my finger alone, with a pamphlet saying, Ramaphosa must go.
Yes, I remember.
And at one stage, Benjani Chauke, who's Ramaphosa's thug, brought 1,000 people from Limpopo and the Free State to come and do a counter-protest. 1,000 people to one guy. They bussed them in.
Right into the crowd.
They brought them in the afternoon when it was lunchtime on the back of Bucky's KFC. Yeah? And these guys were surrounding me. They were shouting me down. In fact, the second day that I was standing there, they even assaulted me. They broke my poster. One of them punched me in the chest, etc., etc. Didn't matter. You know, I laughed when that 1,000 guys came. I said, you are going to multiply my protest by 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And that's all they did. Because what happened on the TV screens is they were the backdrop. And I continued to come to the center. I continued to be there, laughing at them. So what did they do? They amplified my message that Ramaphosa must go, and they underlined the fact that the guy is a thug, because this was thuggery. So my point is, then, when they expelled me, and it was very interesting how they expelled me, because they charged me with all kinds of things, including that I said that the judiciary in South Africa is captured.
Is it not?
No, exactly. Now, can you believe, even Gwede Mantashe, even Bladen Nzimande at certain stages of their political life had complained about that the judiciary is captured. But when I said it here, they brought a charge against me. They said, no, the NEC said, as if the NEC is an authority on such matters, the NEC of the ANC said the judiciary is not captured. Therefore, it's not captured. And therefore, that you have said it's captured, you have now acted indisciplined. So, I'm sitting in that disciplinary hearing. They bring all these charges against me. Ralph Nkajima, who's the chair of the disciplinary committee of the ANC, is talking to the prosecutor, Amanda. They think, because this was a virtual meeting, they think they've muted it. But the stupids haven't muted it. He says to her, Amanda, we better speed this thing up because you know the president wants him to be expelled before the conference. This is a week before conference. So I respond, I said, hey, Ralph, I can hear you. Then they suddenly mute. So, of course, 4 days before conference, they expel me. But I was ready for them because I could see this is a kangaroo court. The moment
so
they
you got expelled for saying Ramaphosa must go?
I got expelled for saying Ramaphosa must go. I got expelled for saying that the judiciary in South Africa is captured. Those were the main charges. So as soon as they expelled me, I filed my appeal. Now, in terms of the ANC constitution, when you file an appeal, your original status of membership remains intact until the appeal is heard. Now they were in trouble because they didn't want me at the conference. And I was a delegate from my branch, and also I'm a former member of the NEC, and all former members of the NEC have a right to attend ANC national conferences. So I went to the accreditation center. I said, I'm here, I want to get my accreditation, I'm going to conference. Phoebe Potgieter, who was then the manager of the ANC, comes with 2 policemen. They take me under the arm.
What?
They throw me out. Illegal, in contravention to the ANC constitution, I get thrown out. So I said, okay, this is how I get treated. I'm going to wait until I see what happens at this conference. But if Ramaphosa is re-elected, and the same crowd of sellouts are coming back with him, I'm out. And the day after he was re-elected, again with millions of rands of bribes paid by his white monopoly capitalist friends, I wrote my letter of resignation. And you can go back to that letter. It's a long letter, it's 5 pages. It's prophetic. In fact, Professor Chris Malekani called me the other day. He said, Comrade Carl, I'm busy reading your letter. It's as if I'm reading what is happening in South Africa now. Everything that you predict this man is going to do, that is going to go into an alliance with the Democratic Alliance, that he will eventually take control of state-owned enterprises and put it under his control in the presidency. It's all here in your letter. So that's how I got to the formation of Areta. I formed a small party after I resigned. But you will remember we had a very interesting lunch. It was at a small restaurant in Norwood, at a little nursery. And you said to me, no, man, you can't be the leader of the party. You're a white man. And it made me think. Yes, it brings me back to the beginning of our first discussion, the first podcast, about the unbearable weight of whiteness and acknowledging, even if you've been in the liberation struggle, you continue to be a white person. And this kept on coming back to me. And I kept on saying to myself, but first of all, it's not right to create more political parties. There must be less. It's not right to bring more fractionalism and disunity in the left. We must unite. And honestly, I shouldn't be the president. Why do I want to, even if I was not white? I'm 64. I must be someone who must help to empower young leaders and a young generation, not go and try to be this leader. So all of this played in my head, and eventually I decided, after I also had a meeting with all the political leaders of the left, so-called progressive political parties, we met in 2023 September. And we sat in that meeting, and I looked at them. President Zuma was there. Ace Magashule was there. The president of the PAC was there. Azapu was there. ATM Vuyuzungula was there. And I said, guys, tell me, do any of you disagree with expropriation of land without compensation? They said no. I said, do any of you disagree that the South African Reserve Bank should be nationalized? No. Do you agree that our state-owned enterprises must remain under government control and must be strengthened? Yes. Do you agree that our constitution is fundamentally compromised and should be rewritten right from the foundation up? Yes. I said, so why are we so many around this table? I said, you know why? Because of your egos. This is an ego show. And we're doing a disfavor to the public, to the voter in South Africa, to present to them all this diversity of parties. I said, you know what? You guys like to see your faces up lampposts. They didn't like it. But what I'm saying to you now is almost a verbatim quote of what I said. So I left there. I went back to my executive. I said, after what I said in this meeting, I can't continue with Areta. Because now I'm in contradiction to my own belief that we must unite. I said, go and do your homework. I'm going to do my homework. We must decide what is the right thing to do now. They all came back. I had my view, but I wanted to hear from them. There was Dr. Paul Ngubene, Dr. Job Mohanedi, Nkoshisensha Shezi, a number of them, who was part of that small executive. And all of them said to me, you must join the EFF. I said, yes, that is the decision I'd come to, but I didn't want to tell you. And I came to that decision because the EFF is the largest progressive party in South Africa. It's also the best organized. And it has an ideological foundation, which if I take the documents that we formed Areta on, which was all about radical economic transformation, I'm not going to repeat the things I mentioned just now when I asked those questions to those leaders, because those were the issues that underlie the foundation of Areta. All of them are there in the 7 cardinal pillars of the EFF. So why shouldn't we join the EFF? But I said to them, guys, we're not going to join as Areta, because we need to join with a personal decision, each one of us individually. Go to the EFF and join. I encourage all of you to join. That's when we called the press conference. I joined at that press conference. A number of other former members of Areta joined. And Ntsiki, it was the best decision I ever took, because I found myself received in the economic freedom fighters with so much warmth. Surprisingly, ne? I'm a Mulungu. I liked it when my commander-in-chief, President Julius Malema, spoke about me in one of the press conferences. And they asked him about it. He says, yes, we've got our Mulungu. He's now here with us. But you see, for me, it was not a disregard to call me that. It was an acknowledgement, yes, he's a white guy, but he's part of the liberation struggle. At the same time, I was given the opportunity to be fully integrated into the EFF. The way I was received was not by the president of the EFF or some of the central command team of the EFF coming to that press conference. It was the regional leader of the EFF in Johannesburg, the chairperson of the EFF in Johannesburg, the chairperson of the branch of the EFF. And I wanted it like that, because at the end of the day, it's not about self-aggrandizement. And in politics, every bit of politics is local. If you don't relate to grassroots, if you're not part of ground forces, if you're not rooted in a branch, you are nothing. So some people said, well, you know, you should be immediately appointed to parliament. I said, I don't want to be appointed to parliament just as I've joined. No, why? I'm going to work. I'm going to be part of a campaign in the elections. If on the basis of my work, my branch, my region and my province nominate me for a list conference to go to parliament, I will go. But it must be a proper democratic process. And that is what happened. And I'm happy with that, because that gives whatever I have a sense of being rooted. I'm rooted now in the economic freedom fighters. I'm part of my branch. I worked very hard for this election. I was every day on the ground. I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed working with all my fellow fighters.
Carl, I want to ask you about Parliament and what you feel like. I feel as if a lot of you MPs are not really there for us. You're there for your salaries and jobs, essentially. And I kind of feel like it's an unfair position to put someone in where it's their bread and butter, and then they've got to make these decisions. So can we just unpack a little bit about Parliament and why we even should believe in Parliament?
Look, Parliament is one of the sites of struggle. That's why I was giving you this rather long explanation of how one must work within a party and how you have to be grounded within a political party on the ground, grassroots. Politics is not just Parliament, definitely not. In fact, the most important part of politics is not Parliament, but it's work on the ground, in your community, in your branch, and working within the political party, but also with other civil society organizations, other structures of society. But Parliament is an important site of struggle, Ntsiki, because that is where legislation is formulated and written. And whether we like it or not, that legislation impacts on the lives of people. We can see also the kind of decisions that are decided by the executive and then put into legislation, for instance, about the privatization of state-owned enterprises, decisions about education, decisions about basic facilities such as the right to have clean, running, drinking water, housing, etc., etc. All of that in one way or another will be impacted by the legislation that is passed in Parliament. So yes, members of Parliament receive a salary.
A big one.
It is a good salary. I don't deny that. I think what is important is that those members of Parliament must earn their salary through their work. Now, your question is a valid one. Do they earn it? It is going to depend on the work that they do inside and outside of Parliament. Because remember, Parliament also empowers members of Parliament to have constituency offices. There is provision in funding for those constituency offices. So there's resources that can be made available, can be leveraged in order to serve the community. The question is whether MPs are doing that. What I like about the economic freedom fighters is that there is a clear instruction that we have to be on the ground. It is expected of us, the moment Parliament is not in session, to be back in our constituencies and to work there. It is also expected of us to do regular reports on a weekly basis of what we do in our constituencies. I wish I could show you, I don't have it printed out here, the letter that we received in our caucus from our chief whip, who's also the deputy president of the EFF, Comrade Floyd Shavambu, where he said, we expect from you to give regular reports about your constituency work. We expect from you on a regular basis to file 2 press statements on a weekly basis of the particular portfolio committee that you've been appointed to. That you must file 2 oral questions and 2 written questions every week, which will keep the executive on their toes and be part of the oversight of that executive. So in the EFF, we've got a very clear line of march. We have to work. Okay, so it is very different from the experience I had when I was an ANC MP. In the EFF, also I like that we go there in red overalls. I know sometimes people try to be sarcastic about the red overalls, but it is an indication that we are ready to work. We are not there to come and flaunt expensive suits and just to be there for our own self-aggrandizement. In Parliament, we are going to be the opposition that keep the executive and this sell-out government of national unity accountable. And the EFF is an organization that has got big capacity. In the 38 members, unfortunately we lost 5, but the 38 members that we have in the National Assembly, all of those are people of capacity, are people with ability to represent their communities. And I watched in the last week the way in which we as an EFF caucus were functioning also during the orientation period in Parliament. The questions that were asked, the way in which we participated in those discussions, it was equal to none. The EFF as a caucus was the most active, with the most in-depth questions, with the best research done about those state-owned enterprises and organizations who are coming to present to us, and the Section 9 organizations who are coming to present to us what they are doing.
So do you think that there is wisdom in this good salary? Because, I mean, you made a point there about the fancy cars and whatever, which is something that EFF actually is known for. Like, the leadership is known to be quite superficial and materialistic. So that kind of, there's a gray area there. So is there wisdom in members of parliament being one of the best paid people in society, actually, Because would you guys still be members of parliament if you were earning 5,000 Rand a month?
Well, let me first of all say I disagree with you that the EFF leadership are superficial and that the EFF leadership are simply invested in materialistic things. The EFF leadership work very hard. The EFF leadership are very committed to what they're doing. There is no one working as hard as the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF, Julius Malema.
Okay.
I watched him in this election campaign. Extraordinary in terms of dedication and hard work. But let me come back
to the bigger issue.
To the bigger issue. I believe that it is important for us to be able to say that we are prepared to work regardless of whatever salary we get. And the people who are in the EFF in Parliament have earned their stripes. They have worked their way up. They have been activists even before they entered Parliament and before they received a salary as a member of Parliament. Now, myself personally, for the last 5 years, I've been unemployed because the ANC rendered me unemployable. They made sure that I will not be able to earn a cent. Did I stop working? Did I stop dedicating myself to the liberation struggle? Not for one day. I did continue. And yes, now I'm in Parliament, and of course I'm grateful that I will be able to earn an income. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a member of Parliament earning an income. The issue is not that we should get fixated on the salary. The issue is...
It's a big salary.
Well, it's a reasonable salary.
It's bigger than most people. That's why I'm like,
In our society, I understand what you say in terms of the overall population.
And then you're the same people saying you're fighting for the poor, but you're getting the most money.
No, but first of all, we're not getting the most money, but it is a good salary. I'm not going to argue with you about that. Now, the question is, are we going to continue with our commitment to fight for liberation as we were before we went into Parliament? Because every one of those members of the economic freedom fighters who are today in Parliament have been fighting for liberation and for the ideals of the EFF before we went into Parliament. And I'm watching a number of people who were MPs in the last administration who did not manage to come back because we lost 5 seats, and there was, of course, like in all political situations, a reconfiguration where some people who were in Parliament didn't come back. I've not seen one of those members of the EFF who were previously in Parliament now walking away and saying, we are not continuing with our commitment for liberation. One of my good friends in the EFF, a fellow commissar, Nazir Paulsen.
You know, I'm going to edit out the EFF parts because you're promoting.
Of course I'm promoting.
And I do so
shamelessly.
But I don't want you to do that.
Because I am a member of the EFF and I'm explaining to you why I joined the EFF and what I believe the EFF is all about. So I can't prevent you from editing it out, but I will certainly talk about the EFF because I'm deeply impressed about what the EFF stands for and what I've experienced. I said in many posts recently that in the 45 years that I've been in politics, I've never been as happy as I am since I joined the EFF. And I was telling you about Nazir Paulsen, a member of the Central Command team of the EFF who lost his position in Parliament. He didn't come back. I'm watching how that fellow commissar and fighter is working. He is working as hard as when he was a member of Parliament. So a member of Parliament is a deployment. It is not a right. And us as members of parliament contribute a significant part of our salaries to funding of the activities of the economic freedom fighters. So, yes, we earn a good salary, but we use the money that we get mainly for the work of the economic freedom fighters.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carl. It's been a pleasure. All the best with the way forward. We are looking forward to see what happens in Parliament.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming through. Moya O Light, Moya O Bright. Guys, there you have it. You have your part 2. We'll see you again next time. Tamak.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into it off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.